Hey, this is Darius Arya for Ancient Rome Live. Today, it's a kids seminar, and we're talking about ancient Roman religion, the old gods and the new. We'll start off with the new one. This guy might not look so familiar to you. He's a particular kind of god that's going to be bringing on all kinds of elements from the Greek East. He's a Hellenistic deity associated with time, encompassing really the whole universe, the zodiac, and he's called Ion. He's associated with Kronos and Saturn. But there are many other attributes with him. He's holding a special key. He's got a lightning bolt on his chest. He's a deity that's accreted a bunch of other meanings and a bunch of other symbols. He is in fact found in a temple of Mithras in Ostientica. There he's got his wings. It's really, really stunning. And it just really underlines the fact that Roman religion is very diverse. And over time, the Romans adopted a whole bunch of ideas, including this lion-headed deity. And really, the Romans don't limit themselves to just worshiping the standard Pantheon, but rather over time, they will accommodate, they will bring in and accept gods from this great empire that they conquered. So it's really important to keep this in mind as we work our way through here, that in Roman religion, in worshiping these gods, you can't oblige the gods to do anything, but hopefully they're going to be on your side. There's no holy texts. The importance is really focused around rituals based upon a series of beliefs and practices, always following those ideas of your forefathers, your ancestors. You're looking at them all the time for direction. And of course, you leave behind, I made this, I dedicated this, and we have the inscriptions of the dedicators right there. So we're going to be examining a lot of very interesting aspects, the political life, the social life of the Romans, and how they worshipped this in this polytheistic society. So we'll cover old gods and the new. Now, some more basic ideas. What are you doing when you venerate the deities? Well, you're leaving them something. And you are giving them something. Hopefully, then they're going to answer your prayers. So you go to the right God. Again, there's no catechism. You're learning this thing from your parents. And here in this case, you're going to a fertility cult, or you're going to Ceres, the goddess of grain, and she's got a little baby on her lap. So maybe you're a mother, maybe you're dealing with pregnancy, and you're thinking about the fertility that comes to you. It's a personal message, and you leave an offering. So not just a souvenir that you've gotten at the gift shop. This is something really sincere, really felt. And people go to sanctuaries and they leave these behind. Hopefully their prayers have been answered. So there's a lot of sincerity in this religion. Sure, there's a lot of formulaic and a lot of ritual and a lot of going through the motions, but there's also a lot of belief. There's also a lot of people saying, I need help. I need to have this issue addressed. Health, personal, war, whatnot, a family, and you hopefully will have the gods answering literally your prayers. And that's a big part of the religion. You can participate in a state function. You can participate in your home. You can participate with your friends. You can participate in your business. But again, there's no moral code. It's more communal aspect than anything else. And it's a big part of society. It's a big part of your social organization is going to that festival and making those offerings and honoring the spirits of the dead and so forth. So it becomes quite complex. And of course, as these religions do start, it starts off much of it focused on the original life of people, which is agriculturally based. So you're praying to the gods for rain, for sowing the seeds, for a good harvest, and so forth. And over time, a lot of the urban aspects, as Rome develops into the great metropolis, will take over. And many of the manifestations of the deities in the city will then make so much of religion of Rome be about what happens in the Earps, in the great city of Rome. But always you're making vows. And so from the vow, you make a votive offering that shows your connection to the gods, that you're asking for something, and they're going to be able to hopefully reward you with what you need to have answered or solved or healed. So votive offerings is a big way to get into Roman religion's the standard pantheon you're making these offerings to, and it will change, of course, as the city of the empire grows. Now, making a sacrifice. Here's a big bull sacrifice. You have the victimari figures. These guys, bare-chested, are slaves who are really charged with making the proper functions there of killing the bull, gutting the bull, finally even making sausages and so forth, as then the priest will inspect the entrails for answers from the gods. And this is a great relief that shows us then just how important and how this is a state function on a grand scale, because who else can afford something like a bull? It's for a big occasion, and the whole city can turn out, not just for the barbecue, but turn out for all the pageantry that's involved as well, for the well-being of the citizens of Rome. So sacrifice, big and small, from pouring milk or wine, offering barley cakes, then you have the big bull or cow or pig sacrifice. Now, where do the Romans, get their ideas? In and of themselves, they have their own ideas. They look at nature. They respond to that. They identify their gods. They worship their gods. But they got ideas also from other places, from the Etruscans, from the Greeks. So here are a bunch of Greek vase paintings that are found in the beautiful Etruscan Museum in Villa Giulia in Rome. And of course, these are Greek vases, and Greeks sold their wares to the Etruscans that they were trading with, and we find them then in the tombs of the Etruscans. And those are not just pretty vases, they tell stories, and they show the lives of the heroes and the gods, and these ideas then are transmitted to the Etruscans, transmitted to the Romans, and of course a big figure looming large throughout all of this is a guy like Hercules. So we can turn to him for a little bit and understand a lot of this relationship in all of this is I'm going to give something to you. Hopefully you'll give something back to me. You can't oblige a god, but certainly you can sweeten the deal with beautiful offerings such as these. Of course, these are largely found in the tombs of the wealthy and the deceased, but you can also make these kinds of offerings or those previous votive offerings to the gods to get them to help you. Now, looming large here in a lot of the stories is the figure of Hercules, otherwise known as Hercules. And why is he so appealing to the Greeks and ultimately to the Romans? It's because he is a man who becomes a god. So he has challenges, trials and tribulations, don't we all? And then he overcame them one by one. I mean, I think we all have thousands of labors that we go through in our lives. Hercules had to actually go through 12, and in the end, he's rewarded by going into heaven. What a great aspiring individual for the Romans to look to, especially when we turn to look at the Roman generals, the people that were conquering the world for the state. Of course, they didn't want to have grander associations and sometimes do associate themselves with Hercules himself. This one here is a cult statue from the Forum Boarium. Potentially, it is actually a representation of the likeness of a real Roman general. He's holding the apples of Hesperides, as he often does, and in his left hand, and those are what he gets from somewhere off the coast of Spain. And of course, who was conquering Spain in the 2nd century BC when this was produced? Rome was conquering it. So therefore, you kind of look to these sort of figures also as inspiration for those Roman Republican generals that loom large and want to seem even grander in life, particularly in the afterlife. So he's a huge figure for us, and you think then of the connection from Greece to Rome. Everyone likes Hercules and loves those stories and loves his fantastic success. And you appeal to him and you ask him for favors and you ask him for hope. So here we have a headless Hercules with Minerva accompanying him up to the heavens. He's now made it. He's now a god. And this is found in one of the 2 temples in the sanctuary of San Bono in Rome. So a very, very important archaeological site, a lot of votive offerings, and of course you're always communicating with the deities, everybody, from the high to the low, from the rich to the poor, appealing to these gods for help, for security, for answers. And of course we have our standard deities alongside here. We have Hercules, we talked about, we have Minerva, we have Venus, we have Mars. And of course we know them as Aphrodite and Ares. In the Greek world, these are deities again that you had an affinity for, obviously, goddess of love, god of war. The original Roman calendar started in March, dedicated to Mars. And because that was such a big part of you start the agricultural season in March, you go to war in March. You're getting out of the snow is thawed and so forth. And here they are as a famous couple, but think about it in terms of the Romans in the imperial period. Julius Caesar said he was descended from Venus through Aeneas, so we get the Trojan myth cycle, and then Mars the Avenger, avenging the death of the assassination of Julius Caesar. You have Mars there, Mars Ultor, the Avenger, in the form of Augustus, Venus Genetrix in the form of Julius Caesar. So things can also get politicized with the old gods as well as the new. We can turn to Apollo seated here with his lyre. He's going to be doing a musical competition, and Minos is the judge, and Marsyas is the figure that challenges. Apollo ultimately loses, but what we have here is messages to us, the humans, the mortals. Don't practice hubris. Do not overstep your bounds. Do not be full of pride. Don't challenge the gods. You will end up skinned alive, as we'll see with poor Marsyas. And also, gods, the old gods, had multiple meanings. He's the god here of Apollo of music, of light, of culture. He's also the vengeful god. He's also the god that punishes us. He's also the god that brings the plague. So you have very complex relationships with deities in various manifestations, also defined by various epithets. Jupiter the Thunderer, Jupiter the Avenger, and so on. Here's Marsyas, poor Marsyas. This is a statue that we found in the Villa della Vignace excavation in Park of the Aqueducts in 2009. He's now permanently a guest in the Monte Martini Museum. But again, look at this poor man tied to a tree and skinned alive because he dared challenge the god. Do not do that, says Roman religion. Now, what about Roman beliefs that are more inherently Roman? Here is the figure Curtius, who, when the gaping hole opened up in what would become the Roman Forum, decided to sacrifice himself to close up that chasm. And of course, the chasm closed up, and what was left behind was a spring. So the Lacus Curtius is one of those famous, very old sites in the city of Rome in the Forum Piazza itself. Is he early Republican? Is he archaic in date? When did he actually do what he did? That's all debated, because over time, new stories, myths acquire new meanings, have new significance to people over time. In the end, it's a place where you wish well the health of the emperor even after the spring dried up. So the Lacus Curtius is just one of those many, many stories that are told, tied to the gods, linking the activities of human beings, the early Romans, to the lives of the gods themselves. And you listen, you look at prodigies, you look at omens, you look at lightning strikes, you look at the entrails of the animals that you are sacrificing, and you are getting meaning from that. The gods are always communicating to you. You need to figure out what they mean. So you have a whole pantheon of deities that you can appeal to. And of course, with the passing of time, there are more and more gods to appeal to ask for help, because that's what Rome does. They bring out deities from other places that they're conquering and going to war with. People are traveling. People are coming into Rome. It becomes an international hub, and so people bring their ideas and their beliefs. But Romans go back to the old days and remember fondly these things that were done by the original inhabitants of Rome, such as the example of Curtius, who sacrifices himself on behalf of the state when Rome was going against the Sabines living over on the Quirinal Hill. And so we remember these as guidelines on how to live our lives and how ultimately to respect the gods, deal with the gods, interpret the signs of the gods. These are all important aspects of this religion. Again, religio is veneration of the gods. It's a sense of a moral obligation and duty. And the opposite of all that is superstitio, excessive, unreasonable fear. And ultimately, religio leads to pietas, reverence to the gods. And you want to keep the peace with the gods. You want to follow the the guidelines and the rules and the traditions of your ancestors, the mos maiorum. So there are many things within religion and dealing with the gods. It's not so much the mythology, it's really this is how you properly deal with them and how you treat them. And hopefully, they'll treat you better. Well, the expansion of the empire told the Romans they were doing a good job. So here we have one of many monuments that are lost, variously identified. If we look at the scholarship, this comes from the tomb of the Hadrian outside of the walls of Rome, but is now this relief is in the Vatican museums. And just to say then that so much of religion, so much of Roman religion has to do with place, physical spaces in the city of Rome. And then over time, they export these ideas and these deities and these goings-on in their calendar system to the people throughout the empire. They don't force these beliefs or these traditions and festivals associated with them on other people, but people came to know what happened in Rome mattered. The Roman calendar mattered. Everyone still had their own local traditions, but the local traditions of Rome, they had far-reaching implications. So this just goes to show you that the topography, the lay of the land, the hills, the springs, the grottos, all those different features in the city of Rome figured heavily in the stories told to us and recorded by authors like Ovid in his Fasti, his calendar system of Rome. So we're going to turn then from this Hadrian relief of some lost, unknown monuments. We're going to turn to something that we know exactly where it's found and what it represents. Here is the Cancelleria reliefs found underneath the Piazza della Cancelleria in the Campus Martius, now in the Vatican Museums. And here we have another relationship we should be aware of, is that everyone has relationships with the deities. The Roman emperors will have even more special relationships. They'll have patron gods. Here you have Nerva on the left being accompanied by this figure, one bared breast, like an Amazon kind of figure. So either, this is a Roma figure. This is also can be associated with Minerva. But basically, she's physically touching him, and that's accompanying him into Rome or out of Rome. But definitely, it's a special relationship that you're showing. Is that the emperor is leading the way, is the pious one, keeps the peace of the gods, the Pax Deorum, looking at the Ara Pacis, looking at these kind of monuments and so forth. And even if it's just symbolic, you do see that indeed the Roman emperors throughout the empire would represent that special relationship with the gods that then ensures the safety and well-being of the people of empire. And there's so many examples of this. And of course, ultimately, it's Concordia Augusta and Pietas Augusta. So you start to name it after the emperor's title of Augustus and start to transform these meanings and traditions into something new. So there's a lot of old tradition. There's a lot of innovation, playing off that old tradition. Here we have Claudius, the emperor, as Jupiter, got the eagle. For example, you can definitely tell he's supposed to be Zeus or Jupiter, but of course the face is of Claudius. Claudius gets deified. Not every emperor does, but again, you want to exemplify and underline that special relationship with the gods, especially if Julius Caesar, Augustus, Claudius will become a divus figure that is kind of like a Hercules. Good service, good terms, good succession leads to deification, becoming one of the pantheon of the gods with their own priests, even though it is a special kind of special category. And they're worshiping the spark, the divine spark that every human has. And of course, the emperors are more fitting to be worshipped. And so we have incredible representations of many emperors and empresses in the form of the gods themselves, kind of stepping into that role. And nowhere was it more clear, let's say, early on in the imperial period than the Pantheon. So we'll take a look at the outside of the Pantheon. The Pantheon here is built by Hadrian in the Campus Martius area. The first one was built by Agrippa, the second one by Domitian. This is the last one on the same location, and it is built by Hadrian. But what we have here is a concept of promoting the deification of the emperor. You can hear the previous live seminar that's up on our YouTube site, We Dig Rome, and you can learn more about the issue of the deification of the emperor there. But suffice to say that inside here you have a unique kind of monument with all the gods inside and also Divus Julius Caesar. Out on the porch, Augustus, Agrippa. One day Augustus would become a god and the idea is he would be inside as well. But this is a monument, not just a normal temple. It's a temple that promotes the deification of the emperor. So it is pretty interesting. It is pretty unique. And of course, it's an architectural wonder with its 2nd century CE dome. The inside, of course, you get a better idea of the space. It is glorious. It is impressive. And of course, it's a focal point in the relationship with the emperor, his people, and the gods. Hadrian liked to hold court, we're told, inside the Pantheon, which is pretty extraordinary if you think about it. Now, there are many other gods that we can talk about, a lot of these new gods. Let's talk about Magna Mater. She has her annual games in the month of April, and she's a deity that comes from Turkey. She's associated with the Trojan cycle. Aeneas being the son of Aphrodite, escapes, and eventually his descendants will be Romulus and Remus. So the tie to Rome was promoted by the Romans themselves. Already in the 2nd century BCE, when her temple is being constructed, she has games, but the celebration and the kind of craziness, in the opinion of the Romans, with the self-castration of the priests was something for non-Romans. The Romans had the benefit of having the games, the theatrical productions of Terence and Plautus and so forth, but that other part was something that was accepted, but not something they participated in. And this is how they're dealing on a one-by-one basis with bringing in new gods, bringing them into the Pantheon, and dealing with the collateral issues, the things that weren't necessarily accepted by the Romans, part and parcel. Same thing's going to happen with Isis. We'll talk about Isis shortly, but definitely this Cybele figure, what they called Magna Mater, is someone who is definitely, for any Roman of the Republican period, a rather strange individual. And yet with that tie to Aeneas and that mythology, she's right there on the Palatine Hill. And back and forth this goes with just exactly how strange she was, but over time she becomes more and more acceptable. And by the reign of Claudius the emperor, you don't even need to castrate yourself to become one of the priests. So Roman citizens eventually can even enter the priesthood. So turning from Magna Mater, let's look a little bit at Isis. And she is a deity, a fertility deity, associated with the richness of the Nile River. And she comes in first as an outsider through trade, probably already in the 2nd century BCE. And we move forward in time, and she's becoming more and more acceptable. And she gets a series of temples that are built, particularly in the imperial period. Caligula's a big fan. Domitian's a fan. His dad Vespasian was a fan. And so you've got, by the Flavian period, a massive temple complex, not just of Isis, but also of Serapis, a Ptolemaic invention. And she is a deity again. Well, they stand out. The art looks different. Men would shave their heads as devotees. And there's something called initiation. So everything else we've talked about thus far, there's not so much of you have to learn something extra. But for these new gods, you did. You had to be initiated. And it's an old concept, because you have many things also in the Greek world where you had the Eleusinian mysteries that you had to be initiated into. Now here come these new gods into Rome. And if you choose to, you're not forced to, but if you choose to worship Isis, you could be initiated into some particular rituals. And same thing for another guy that we'll talk about, Mithras. So it becomes quite dynamic, and you have a whole menu, a whole list of gods you can appeal to. Maybe motivated by your family, motivated by the military, motivated by your job. But in any case, you have the free choice of worshiping these people. You don't have to go to state sacrifice anyways. You choose to for the food, you choose to for the social aspect, you do to ensure that your city-state will succeed and thrive. And so we see many ideas, many things percolating through with this artwork. A lot of the artwork here, the previous images come from the Temple of Isis in the Campus Martius, now in the Capitoline Museums. This is a figure of Tiber with the Sphinx that he's leaning on, and the various little kids represent the various channels of the Nile as it feeds into the Delta. And today it's in Braccio Nuovo in the Vatican museums. So a really, really popular god was Isis and all of the related deities. These images are coming to us from the Vatican museums, but also come from originally found in Hadrian's villa. Hadrian was a big lover of of Isis and promotes the cult, and he spends time in Egypt and so forth, and then he brings back those ideas with him to enjoy. And you can see then that the style is different. Everyone could recognize Isis in Egyptian art, and again, it's something that really picks up in popularity, particularly when you think about the breadbasket of the Roman Empire was Egypt, and you think about who's ensuring a lot of that safe sailing was Isis. So you see all these different connections going on here. And there's also, for Hadrian, a personal connection because he lost his young lover Antinous in Egypt. And so what happens afterwards is he deifies him. And it becomes a very popular cult. And people are worshiping the god Antinous. Here he is appearing as an Egyptian pharaoh. And again, just to show you the different ways in which Romans would spontaneously create cults. And sometimes it would go viral. And Antinous ends up being a very popular god, not because it was forced or promoted, but because the people could identify with eternal youth, then deified. Here's Mithras. Mithras is a very interesting deity coming from Persia, promoted and popular with the military, and he spreads like wildfire, and people met in small groups. You've got over a dozen Mithraean temples in homes, in warehouses, and so forth, hidden away in Ostia, same number in Rome, but there are probably hundreds and hundreds in Rome at one point. A deity born in a cave, a deity that fights against lightness and dark. And you see all kinds of astrological signs here. You see the sun and the moon in this image. You see the bull, Taurus. You see the dog star. You see the Hydra, the snake, and there's even a Scorpio. So a lot of the inner workings of this particular belief system is tied to the movement of the stars and the constellations. So every single cult, you're not imitating the other guys. You're coming up with your own innate characteristics, and then people can choose to believe, can choose to participate, can choose to share in this. And so again, you just get the increase in the polytheistic society that was ancient Rome and the Roman Empire. So things are coming early on from the Greek belief system. You get things that are just inherently Roman local, the god of mold, the god of the door hinge, the ideas of pietas, piety. They have worship ideas, virtus, excellence. That's inherently Roman, let's say. And then, of course, they have their own mythology, their own manifestations, their own epiphanies of gods right in the form. Castor and Pollux show up. And then from abroad come Magna Mater and Mithras and Isis and become, over time, Roman. So we want to think about this all-embracing kind of concept. Now, Jews come over into Rome already in the 2nd century BCE and establish a community having up to 12 synagogues in Trastevere area. But that is from that, let's say, development, of course, you get the arrival of the Christian community, or even developing right from the Jewish community initially, and Constantine legalizes Christianity, but that's after waves and waves of persecutions, and then years of don't ask, don't tell, and then waves and waves of persecutions all the way up to the reign, the great persecution of Diocletian. But Constantine sees the writing on the wall and accepts this as another god, doesn't make the belief of the original gods of Rome illegal. That's going to take quite a long time. We have to get really to the end of the 4th century CE for that to happen. But Constantine was a big proponent and a big character in the movement of the normalization of the worship of the Christian God. A very big deal. This is, of course, the colossal statue from the Basilica and the Forum area, and it's now in the courtyard of the Capitoline Museums, the oldest museum, a public museum in the world, a spectacular place to visit, and we have an entry on that on Ancient Rome Live. So just kind of winding up here, giving you some ideas of old beliefs, old gods, old traditions, and then, of course, in come the new gods in different ways for different purposes. Sometimes you're just evocatio, calling out gods from cities that you're conquering. Sometimes, through trade and whatnot, new ideas are transmitted. But do follow us on YouTube. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is Darius Arya for the American Institute for Roman Culture. And reach out to us with new ideas for future topics on the live seminars. Thank you very much.